Joining us now, Ali Younes. Ali is a senior journalist with the online division of Al Jazeera English, and he's got a piece out today on the Trump pullout of Syria, and he's covered Syria extensively and the problems that actually ISIS is having. He says is having a civil war right in between themselves, and he doesn't think pulling our troops out is a good idea. I do, so we're going to get his side on. Ali, great to have you, sir.
Thank you, John. Glad to be on.
Okay, I read your piece, very insightful. So let's start with the top. Share with our audience why you think the U.S. and the president pulling 2,000 troops out of Syria now is a bad idea.
Well, I'm going to say something that might shock you. In fact, I don't think pulling the American troops from Syria is a bad thing. I totally don't think that. However, in my piece, a lot of people think that pulling the troops is a bad thing. A lot of people in America, obviously, but also a lot of people in this region who have vested interest to keep the American troops tied down, to keep the American involvement in Syria or in this region tied down because they would ultimately serve their own interests. But I could tell you that what the pulse of this region is with regard to the American troops. People here, before President Trump announced to pull the troops out from Syria, they were under the impression or were thinking, perhaps was legitimate or otherwise thinking, that the U.S. involvement in Syria, it's an old trick from the Iraqi playbook in which that U.S. troops stayed in Iraq, helped the Kurds, and eventually divided up Iraq along ethnic and sectarian lines, and at the end destabilized Iraq, and by extension destabilized the region. This destabilization that happened in Iraq ultimately gave rise to ISIS, and it brought extensive and wanton terrorism into this region. Now, come back to Syria. People were thinking that the U.S. there slice off part of Syria to be with the Kurds and boil up this ethnic and nationalistic and sectarian divides that's in the region, ancient to this region, by having the U.S. presence or the U.S. troops maintain power and support one party against the other. So, with pulling the troops out, people thought, we might have been thinking wrong. President Trump maybe is not having nefarious plans for this to divide Syria and destabilize the region. If Syria is divided along ethnic and sectarian lines, it will be problematic. It will destabilize Jordan. It will spill over into Israel. It will spill over into Iraq again. It will spill over into Turkey. That's not in the interest of the region, nor it's in the interest of the United States.
So, Ali Younes, when you say that there are certain people that want the U.S. troops there to serve their own interests, give us an example of what their own interests would be, sir.
Yes. I mean, look, you have countries, in the Middle East, this is a lot of old ruling families. It's always bickering and fighting each other. For example, Saudi Arabia has a beef with Syria. So it's in the interest of Saudi Arabia to maintain U.S. presence there, to poke Syrian regime and destabilize the regime and maintain support for the Kurds. And the Kurds, ultimately, they want to slice off their own. They are Syrian Kurds. Within Syria, like you say, I'm a Catholic in America, or I'm a Baptist in America, or I'm Arab American, African American, Italian American. But in the Middle East, if you are an ethnic or religious background, you tend to want your own country and divide the larger country. Mm-hmm. Saudi Arabia, I use Saudi Arabia as an example, wants to destabilize Syria. They want the U.S. troops to remain there to serve Saudi interest against the Syrian regime. Not that I support the Syrian regime. It's undemocratic, it's dictatorial. But if you want to look at the larger picture, geostrategic picture in the Middle East, you don't want to destabilize countries. Mm-hmm. And we have a clear example what happened in Iraq. That gave rise to ISIS. It brought Al-Qaeda. We had something happen in Afghanistan. And, the U.S. have made mistakes. Invasion was a mistake. War were a mistake. We could have worked better with the regime to improve how they treat their people. Instead, the U.S. doles a lot of money, a lot of aid. They just gave Jordan $745 million last month as part of $1.6 billion without any conditions as far as the human rights, democratic governance, and the same thing goes for Saudi Arabia and all these countries. And I think in my opinion, I think the United States should focus more if it wants to win hearts and minds in the Middle East, and it wants to get rid of the stigma that the United States support dictators and support terrorism in this region. Terrorism, what I mean, state-sponsored terrorism, not Al-Qaeda or ISIS.
Okay, so that makes a lot of sense. We're with Ali Younes as a senior journalist with the online division of Al Jazeera English. You can read Ali, just go to Al Jazeera, I think it's aje.com. Am I right, AJE?
No, it's aljazeera.com, ALJAZEER.com. My latest piece, I discussed ISIS civil war, the going on theological civil war. It's a prelude to another piece that discusses what's going on in this terrorist group and discuss the ramifications of the pullout and what's the views from ISIS on the ground and the views from this region as well as the U.S. on this pullout.
Ali is senior writer for Al Jazeera English, and he also covers Syria in depth. Been there many times. Ali, let's get to the ISIS civil war that is going on that you reported in your piece, which, by the way, was excellent writing and reporting. That's why I wanted to have you on, get your perspective. Share our audience what is going on in ISIS.
Well, as far as ISIS, this is... people think this is just a normal Muslim group. It is not. It is very extremist, even by religious Muslim standards. And currently it is divided within ISIS itself. If we establish that ISIS is an extremist group, that's the first level. The second level, there's an ultra-extremist group. Okay, that's the second level, I should say, the first level is extremism, general extremism. The second level, there is a moderate strain that is extremist, but it's moderate extremism. And there is a third strain, it's ultra-extremism. Okay, the general extremism, for example, they would, excommunicate any Muslim who practices his religion or his faith outside their own strict interpretations of Islam or the religion. Okay, the general one. The moderate one, they would excuse Muslims, like, okay, I am a Muslim person, and I am not well-versed in religion. I am not an expert. I'm not a religious person. I'm a secular person. So some scholars, within ISIS or otherwise, would say, well, he's excused. He is ignorant. He doesn't know. Now, the ultra-extremist group, not only would excommunicate me, for example, that they will also excommunicate the religious scholars who have given me excuse. So based on this interpretation, the ultra-extremist group who are taking hold of this group, they have imprisoned, as I reported in my piece, they have imprisoned several ISIS scholars in jail in Syria, and this pocket called Hijin, it's around the Syrian-Iraqi border. They put these so-called moderate scholars in jail, okay, and before they went to execute them, but fully knowing that the U.S. will ultimately bomb that jail. And lo and behold, the U.S. bombed that jail and killed all these, quote-unquote, moderate extremists that would help the ultra-extremist group, all the people who really want to get rid of any person who criticizes them or any religious scholar who might be viewed as a threat because they have a more lighter interpretation of their own extremism. So this has been going on in the past few years as well. And many have criticized the self-appointed leader of this group, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who has taken, as I reported in a story, over 12 sex slaves, concubines. Some people find that boring, and he has accumulated riches, lots of gold, millions of dollars for looting the Iraqi treasury in Mosul when he took it over in 2014, or from stealing oil, oil from the Iraqi fields, that have been smuggled all over the region. So all those who criticized him or sent him letters, pledging allegiance to him, but at the same time criticizing him, they were killed or imprisoned or fled this region, Mosul or Syria. So this has been going on and has weakened the group, coupled with the with ISIL being defeated on the ground in Iraq and in Syria. Excuse me. So these are some of the reasons why ISIS now is a sunset drive. It's going down as far as its hold on territory and as far as resources and recruits. And one of the experts who has told me in my piece that before ISIS was getting 1,500 people, new recruits. Now it's getting 0. So ISIS has clearly been defeated. U.S. policy has been working in supporting the Iraqi government and in supporting other to fight ISIS. But also ISIS has saw the seeds of its own demise, of its own defeat, because it's just too extreme by any standard of religion, even by standard of its own extremists, as I report in the piece.
Well, I was at a seminar last weekend, and they were talking about, I think the seminar leader was Anne. I can't think of her last name right now, but she was leading, she had made a movie, and she had interviewed Yemeni young men that ISIS had recruited, couple of, not recently, about a year old, that they had recruited. And you think, well, when ISIS recruits these people, it's for, jihad and the 17 versions or whatever it is. And in the interviews that she had filmed, these young men from Yemen were joining that because they were promised heat, food, electricity, and an iPhone. It had nothing to do with jihadism at all. And so it's just they were in a bad place and they offered them something better and they went. And so what you're saying is their recruiting now is way down, right?
Yes, it's almost to zero because ISIS has no territory. In fact, the people that now held up in this region of Syria called the Hijin area, it's a very, very small area. It could be bombed, into the Stone Age if the Syrian regime, for example, decided to go in, or the United States wanted to go in. But nevertheless, that being said, ISIS is not going away. Extremism is not going away in the region. So long as the underlying conditions remain in this region, there's sectarianism, lack of democracy, lack of prosperity for this region, lack of good government. So long as we divide ourselves into Shia, Sunni, as Europe in the Middle Ages, we're Catholics and the Protestants. This region is still in the Middle Ages, similar to Europe was in the Middle Ages. Division along ethnic and divisions along sectarian religious lines. So long as these conditions, you will find groups will rise up from the ashes and take up the mantle to support one group against the other. So and that's very problematic. And I don't see the Middle East will be stabilized anytime soon. So long as look. The Middle East is the only region in the world where democracy has not taken hold yet. Only maybe some in Tunisia, but it has not taken hold yet. And unfortunately, the United States has not made the conditions upon the regimes that it supports in this region in making strides in freeing the people from the yoke of dictatorship. And it's quite an unfortunate situation, similar to what we see in Saudi Arabia, in the UAE, gross violations of human rights and civil rights of the people, and which drive people toward extremism. It's plain and simple.
We're with senior journalist from Al Jazeera English Online Division, Ali Younes, has a great piece out today on the U.S. Syrian troop pullout and also the conflicts going on within ISIS itself and how it's declining. You can read that by going to aljazeera.com, aljazeera.com. That's Al Jazeera English. Ali, let me ask you something else. I got about 2 minutes.
Sure.
So you said when the U.S. pullout of Syria of the 2,000 troops is complete, what will happen?
Well, a lot of things could happen. First, the Kurds will feel betrayed, rightly so, because they threw a lot with the American troops. But, the Kurds, they have their own plans. They want to slice off the country. And to slice off a country, you establish your own country within a country. That's destabilize the region. But Iranians, will be happy because the Iranians will support the Syrian regime. And the Syrian regime is a dictator regime, but it's not a secular. It is a secular regime. It's not an extremist ideology. So the Iranians will fill in, the Russians will fill in, but this does not mean animosity toward the U.S. But who feel threatened by it? Other regional countries such as Saudi Arabia, UAE, who try to drum the war against Iran in this region, which will be devastating for everybody in this region, not only Iran, but all the Arab countries. So we have some winners and losers. The winners, obviously, those who support the Syrian regime, the Iranians, and maybe the Turks will win. And the Syrian regime, ultimately, because it's their own territory. It's Syria, still Syria, a sovereign country. And the losers will be the Kurds and their allies in this region, especially in the Gulf region.
Ali, we're out of time. Fascinating segment. Great job on your piece and great segment. I learned a lot. I love when I can get veteran journalists like yourself on from around the world that have actually been there, done that, seen it with their own eyes. You can share that with our audience. And very eye-opening, great expose, Ali, and great work. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much, John. I appreciate it. Glad to have you on.